Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to the colleagues in Korea. My name is Rang Lee, a senior policy analyst at the OECD CFE, the Center for Entrepreneurship, SMEs, Regions, and Cities. I'm also a secondee from MOLIT, the Korean Ministry of Land Infrastructure and Transport. So I'm very delighted to welcome you today to OECD report launch event. As this has been done through the close collaboration between OECD and MOLIT. The title of the report is Enhancing Compactness, Connectivity, and Accessibility in Korea. Thank you for joining us again today. Let me first do a bit of housekeeping. This webinar is being recorded now. Also, since this is a Zoom webinar, only speakers can take the floor. Other participants can use the Q&A function to submit the questions. If you have any technical issues, feel free to leave the message on the chat. Before we begin, let me quickly tell you about today's agenda. We will start with opening remarks, followed by presentations on the report's main findings. We'll then continue with a panel discussion with three distinguished experts from different backgrounds. There will be a dedicated Q&A session after the panel discussion. We will conclude the event with a short summary of today's discussion. Then, let me introduce two speakers for opening remarks. First, I'm very pleased to welcome Sang-il Lee, Director General for Policy Planning at MOLIT. Afterwards, we will hear the words from Nadim Ahmed, Deputy Director of OECD CFE. Mr. Director General of MOLIT, Sang-il Lee, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Good morning and good afternoon. I'm Sang-il Lee, Director General for Policy Planning at MOLIT of Korea. It is a great pleasure to meet Deputy Director Nadim Ahmad of the CFE of the OECD. I also extend my greetings to the OECD research team and regional policy experts joining us today. Our ministry and the OECD have maintained a strong and close partnership, advancing Korea's regional policy and contributing to the OECD expanding role in the international community. In particular, the OECD ministerial meeting on regional development policy held with great success in Warsaw, Poland in May was an invaluable opportunity where our minister shared the policy initiatives to enhance regional competitiveness and explore the sustainable policy directions with the other member countries. Furthermore, through annual joint research, our ministry and the OECD have worked together on a variety of topics, including smart cities, carbon neutrality, and spatial data by analyzing international best practice, formulating policy recommendations, and disseminating them among members and partners. The recently published report, Enhancing Compactness, Connectivity and Accessibility in Korea, offers important implications for Korea policy direction. The report provided the assessments of Korea key policies, such as balanced development and innovation cities, while identifying the remaining challenges. The study also proposed 37 regional hubs with the potential to serve as central nodes for service delivery. Additionally, it presents policy recommendations to support the development of mega regional areas in Korea. As our new governments inaugurated in June, promotes balanced development through the fostering of mega regional areas. The OECD's recommendations offer timely and valuable guidance. Despite Korea's continued efforts toward balanced development, the gap between the capital region and the rest of the country has continued. Amid population decline and aging, concerns are growing over the potential local extinction. To ensure that residents in non-capital areas can enjoy a quality of life comparable to that in capital areas, establishing the spatial strategies to foster more competitive and self-reliant regions has become a top priority in our national and regional policies. To this end, the Korea government aims to concentrate functions in major harbor cities and strengthen connections between these cities and their neighboring areas, thereby building mutually supportive metropolitan regions. To make these metropolitan regions successful, we are creating innovation spaces such as urban convergence special zones and are working to attract businesses and young talent to these regions. In addition, we plan to expand the transport networks within mega regions to support integrated economic and living functions across each area. Today's workshop will focus on the compact and the network strategy linked to transport planning, which is a topic highly relevant not only for Korea, but also for countries that are struggling with the shrinking population and the declining regional competitiveness. I look forward to in-depth discussions that can serve as a valuable reference for regional policy development in member countries. I sincerely thank the OECD research team for their dedicated efforts and achievement so far, and hope that through continued joint research with our ministry, we can share experience and knowledge, refine our policy direction, and contribute meaningfully to the international communities. Our ministry is committed to active cooperation, and we look forward to OECD continued interest and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director General, for the opening remarks. And Nadim, could you give us your opening remarks, please?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Rang. And thank you also, Director General Sang-il Lee, for excellent opening remarks. And also it's a pleasure to meet you today, even if only virtually. And I hope we get the opportunity to see each other, I think, in person very soon, and we can continue to have this conversation around our fantastic collaboration. And today, of course, we have an opportunity to talk about one of the outcomes of our really long-standing excellent collaboration, and that's today's report that's looking at one of the most pressing challenges that Korea faces today, and that's that how to adapt to significant demographic changes. And I think you've already given a fantastic tour de force around the report and the rationale for the report and the reason why the report is so important. But let me perhaps just add a few, I think, stark statistics to this conversation. I mean, we know, for example, and you will know better than most, of course, that Korea's population peaked in 2022 and it's projected to decline by about 15 million people by 2017. That's a fall of nearly a third. And over the same period, we're talking about a drop in the share of working age population expected to fall from about 70% today, in fact over 70% today, to less than half by 2070. So I think that paints a stark picture of just how important this work is. Now, The subnational dimension is also critically important in terms of how that demographic change works out. And we know, for example, that towns and villages that are, especially those that are far from major cities, are expected to see the biggest declines. And as you've already said, Seoul metropolitan area, which accounts for about half of Korea's population, around half of economic activity, expected to see its concentration, I think, increase over that period of change. And now these changes, I mean, they create significant challenges for policy, and we'll hear an awful lot more about that in the conversation that follows, in particular in ensuring access to services, mobility, and opportunities for everybody, wherever they live. And I think that backdrops alone makes this report really important. But it's relevant, as you've already said, I think, goes beyond Korea. Although Korea is at the forefront of demographic decline, it's certainly not alone. 14 OECD countries are projected to have fewer inhabitants by 2060. Indeed, we already know that 40% of towns and small cities in the EU have already shrunk over the last decade alone. And in fact, I'm joining you today from Galicia. Can you still hear me, by the way? Because I see my screen is freezing. Just want to make sure you can hear me.
It's fine.
You can. Okay, super. Sorry, I'm joining you on the telephone for those of you who don't know, and so the connection may be dropping out. But I wanted to say that one of the reasons I mentioned that, I guess, is because I'm joining you from a part of Spain, Galicia, which has also seen its fair share of demographic change over going back over centuries. But over the last decade in particular, it's also seen its own demographic changes that are also useful to this conversation. It's in the midst of another wave of rural depopulation and urbanization. And as I speak, and I'm joining you from one of those regions, one of those small municipalities at the moment, which is both benefiting from some of that change, but also, of course, experiencing some of the consequences of it. So the questions that Korea is grappling with, how to maintain these services, connectivity, and opportunity, given the shrinking and aging, is what I hope this report will inform the current revision of the National Territorial Plan. But I hope that it's also relevant across the OECD. And as many of you know, demographic change was a significant theme at the ministerial meeting of the Regional Development Policy Committee that we held in Warsaw only a few weeks ago. And in fact, this report draws on experiences that were shared during that conversation from outside of Korea. For example, we have experiences from Toyama, from Cork, and also the String mega region. But it in turn provides lots of lessons and solutions that will help other countries and regions, I think, confront these similar challenges. And we're going to hear more about those examples in a second. But I think in particular, one of the key points is the benefits of compact and connected strategies. And that's already, I think, points that have been well made by the Director General. But one innovation I wanted to really flag prominently here is the methodology that we've used to identify regional hubs, and the places that serve as the anchors for services and transport in their surroundings. Because the team identified 37 of these hubs in Korea using extensive point of interest data that have been shared by our Korean partners, including information on driving times between settlements. But the potential to apply this approach elsewhere, I think, is going to be transformational in terms of our ability, I think, to guide and inform policy on demographic change in other countries too. So I think that's a real important outcome of this work, notwithstanding the fantastic, I think, recommendations and other analysis supported. Now, in the interest of time, I really want to hear from our speakers who are going to be discussing those remarks. I'm going to wrap up here, but I want to say again, perhaps finish where I started, and just thank again the Korean Ministry of Land, Infrastructure and Transport, MOLIT, for the excellent collaboration that we've had for many years. And of course, without your super collaboration, none of this would have been possible. We've completed, I think, on average, a couple of projects a year for many years now. And all of those have been not just beneficial to Korea, but of course, beyond Korea, to the OECD and even beyond the OECD countries. And our current work, as you've already said, Director General, also includes many other projects, for example, on AI, smart cities and balanced development. And we're exploring continuously with you and your teams new ideas that will continue to be a benefit, not just to Korea, but to other OECD countries. And I think we have an opportunity to look at the work that we're doing here, and indeed all of the work that we've been doing over the years and perhaps focus on new themes. In particular, I think a growing theme of growing importance, of course, is driving regional competitiveness. And I look forward to having a conversation with you, perhaps to see what we can do in driving that agenda to the benefit of Korea and, of course, beyond. So you'll hear more about these areas of work, I mean, certainly the ones that were ongoing and potentially new areas of work in the coming months and years as we continue to strengthen this fantastic collaboration. But today, we have the opportunity and the pleasure of discussing the main findings of the report. And we have the privilege of hearing from a distinguished panel of speakers, including Lewis, Myungwa, and Kevin. And thank you all for joining us. But thank you all for joining today, not just the speakers, but everybody who's sitting here today around the virtual space to have this fantastic conversation. I look forward to hearing the discussion. I'm going to turn my camera off on my phone to save the battery, but I will be on the Zoom chat, but you won't be able to see me from here on in. But thank you again, and I thank you again, Director General. I hope to look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you very much, Nadim, especially during the very busy schedule in Spain. And then I think that those two opening remarks set the stage for today's presentations and discussions perfectly. Now I will give the floor to the two main authors of the report, who will provide the key findings from the project. First, Bernhard Neubauer, economist in the Economic Analysis, Data and Statistics Division of the CFE, will present the quantitative part of the report. Afterwards, Oscar Huerta-Melchor, project manager in the city's Urban Policies and Sustainable Development Division of the CFE, will speak about the policy part. If you have any questions about the presentations, please use Q&A function to submit them. Bernhard and Oscar will address them after their presentations. Also, please be noted that for more general discussion, we also have a dedicated Q&A session with our panelists at the end of this event. Okay, Bernhard, now the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much, Rang, for the introduction. So I'll start with the more quantitative part of the project and tell you something about the population distribution and service availability in Korea. As we already heard, Korea is facing challenges that are relevant also for many other OECD countries beyond. They're either already facing them today or they will face them in the coming decades. It's an aging population, it's overall population decline, and an unequal regional development. But of course, in Korea, these challenges are already in full process now. The country reached its population peak in 2020, and the population counts are now falling. By 2070, Korea will have more people older than 64 than people between 14 and 64 years old, according to recent forecasts. These developments make and will make service provision in rural areas challenging. The first part of this analysis attempts to put the Korean population concentration into an international perspective. Korea is a very urbanized country. According to level 1 of the degree of urbanization, it has a higher share of people living in urban centers, so think of them broadly as cities, than all other OECD countries. About 3 in 4 people in Korea live in urban centers, compared to 4 in 10 in the average OECD country. For a more detailed analysis, we move to level 2 of the degree of urbanization. This allows us to zoom further in and to consider individual settlements, which are clusters of dense grid cells, so a lot of people in a small space. These settlements also include smaller places, such as towns and villages starting from 500 people, towns from 5,000. Here's a map to show you the settlements in the northwestern part of the country in action to give you an idea. It shows the settlements in yellow. So each of them is an observation in our data. And this gives us a level of detail where we can also zoom into these smaller places and If we would only be working with the functional urban areas or with municipalities, we could not zoom in as much. The largest settlement is the urban center of Seoul, which is depicted here in green. It has 19 million inhabitants according to this definition, so more than the administrative city of Seoul, but less than the Seoul metropolitan area. And this makes it the largest urban center in our sample of 32 countries. About 37% of the Korean population live in the urban center of Seoul, more than in any other of the countries studied. So it's really, really large. And then the question is, where does this large size come from? And here you can see a very similar figure to the one before. But now it considers the share of people in Seoul out of those living in Korean urban centers. And similarly in other countries, the share of people living in the largest urban centers out of all urban centers. And in this comparison, Korea is on position 17 of 32, right in the middle of the distribution. So in that sense, the size of Seoul is not really an anomaly. It's in line with the high urbanization level of the country. And the unusual thing in Korea is this overall share of people that live in urban centers, the overall level of urbanization. But of course, Seoul is still huge in absolute terms, and there are costs related to that. The difference between absolute and relative population size appears again when we consider population growth rates that we can see by urban center size. So these are all places above 50,000 people, but in 4 different brackets. And on this slide, you see the annual population growth rate between 2005 and 2020 for urban centers of different sizes. The further on the right you are, means the largest urban center had a much higher growth rate than small urban centers of the country. Here as well, Korea is in the middle of the cross-country distribution. Seoul grew 0.6% annually, small centers grew about 0.3%. But if we translate this to absolute numbers, such a growth rate still implies that Seoul needed to accommodate 1.5 million additional people. This comes with major challenges regarding housing supply and transport congestion. The largest urban centers in some other OECD countries had considerably higher growth rates, but none had such a large increase in absolute numbers. The geographic distribution of growing settlement also gives interesting insights. Population growth in Korea was mainly concentrated in 2 clusters. One in the northwest of the country, around Seoul, where almost all settlements, regardless of their size, grew between 2005 and 20. In the southeast, a substantial share of settlements grew as well. There, it was not necessarily the largest urban centers themselves which grew the most, but rather places, other urban centers, other settlements around them. Beyond these 2 clusters, so in the southwest and in the northeast, most settlements experience population decline. And it's in these remote areas where service provision might become challenging. I'll now move to statistics about service provision and introduce the regional hubs. It's not easy to find good data on service provision in an international context. We will hear that we have amazing data for Korea, but internationally it's harder. So this analysis for the international part compares location of pharmacies, schools, banks, hospitals, and higher education institutions in 32 countries. And here you see an index of service completeness that counts how many of these 5 services a settlement has. You can see that small towns and villages in Korea tend to have more service types, so more different of these 5, than their counterparts elsewhere. Once you get to 50,000 people or more, there's basically no difference between Korea and the OECD average. With our data and definition, we can also look at the relative position of towns and villages. For example, ask, are they close to an urban center, or are they the largest settlements in their surroundings? And in many countries, we see that those places that are near an urban center, they have less schools, they have less pharmacies, they have less banks. Probably because their inhabitants can access these services in the nearby urban center. So there is a substitution effect going on. And people in more remote settlements have a much harder time getting these services elsewhere. So they tend to have more of them themselves. And interesting, this pattern does not hold in Korea. So people need alternative ways and have alternative ways to access these services. That can be online or they can be with good connections to regional hubs. Now, of course, whether you have at least one pharmacy is highly relevant for a village, but not very informative for a larger urban center where you have many of them anyway. And in these places, accessibility analysis can give us interesting insights. On these slides, the blue circle shows you the share of people who cannot walk to a childcare facility or to a pharmacy in 15 minutes in 37 selected settlements. I'll come back to that. And in general, you can see walking access is very good. So most people can reach these facilities in 15 minutes. Korea is well equipped there. This is especially true for the larger settlements, for the places above 1.5 million. But we can also look at different population subgroups. And there we see some interesting differences. For example, on the left, the share of children living close to childcare is higher than the share of the average population. That makes intuitive sense. Parents move to places with good childcare, and childcare facilities open where many children are. However, on the right, you see that this regularity is quite different for pharmacies. Their short walking access would be especially important for older adults who might find it more difficult to drive or to walk longer distances. But the share of older adults that live close to a pharmacy is lower than the share of the overall population. This is especially true in these smaller towns and smaller urban centers. And the figure on the right for pharmacies is essentially the same if we look at doctors, which are also relevant for this group. So I'll close with the definition and identification of the regional hubs. Korea has incredible service data that you were willing to share with us and that we were able to leverage to identify the regional hubs. We do that in the following way. A regional hub must be the largest settlement within 30 minutes driving time, and it must be a service hub. We use point of interest data on 57 types of services to identify these service hubs. So you need to have many of these in different categories. And this implies that regional hubs, they provide many services to their inhabitants and to people in the surrounding areas. And they also have a center function. So you cannot be a regional hub if the settlement very close to you is larger than yourself. And all service hubs have at least 6 of 7 educational services, 6 of 7 healthcare services, 17 of 18 commercial hubs, 12 of 13 general services, and 11 of 12 leisure services. It's amazing what this data would give us. And here you see the map of the resulting 37 regional hubs, geographic distribution. On the left, you see where they are in the country. And as you can see, they include the largest settlements in Korea, but they also include some towns that are relatively small, but that have many different services and then that have a center function for the surrounding areas. And on the right, you can see the railway connectivity. As you can see, many regional hubs are well connected, a lot of railway in Korea. However, there are hubs that do not have a railway station yet, that lack this connectivity to the national railway system. In some of them, there's currently construction going on of railway stations. But yeah, so the connectivity is good in general, but there are brackets of the country where it lacks. I'll now give the floor to Oscar, who will make the case for a compact and connected urban growth in Korea. And for such a strategy, the regional hubs here could serve as an input. That's everything from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bernard. Well, now it's my turn to talk about the policy aspect of this, of the need for compact, connected, and transit-oriented development in Korea. We can go to the next, please. As you have been seeing, Korea's population is aging and shrinking, something that has been mentioned by Bernard and by Nadine before. But also there are 2 other aspects I would like to highlight. Is the overconcentration of population in the Seoul metropolitan area that has more population than the rest of the country. And another feature is that urban sprawl in Korea is one of the key characteristics of urban development in the country. Next. One of the factors that calls our attention here is how do people move in Korea to access services. As far as we can see in the data that we could get, the main transport mode in Korea is still the car. Although Korean cities are trying to shift from a car-oriented to a transport-centered networks, the number of vehicles is still increasing in Korea. These could have different explanations. Is to have the number of urban opportunities that could be reached by car. Also, the accessibility by car to other services outperforms all other means of transport. And also that the elderly use predominantly passenger cars and walking for traveling. This could be some of the issues that could explain why the car is still kind of the king for mobility in Korea. Next. Well, as you can see here in this slide, the cars are allowing people to have greater access to jobs and other services than public transport users. Korea's urban development has long been shaped by car-oriented planning. This is kind of a historical development, like in many other countries. And this has resulted in high car dependency, long commutes, and increased greenhouse gas emissions, especially in suburban areas. This has been reinforced by shortages in affordable housing in central areas that has been pushing residents, including low-income households and the elderly, to the periphery, where public transport tends to be more limited, making private cars the default mode of transport. We have observed that while recent efforts to focus on expanding public transport in Korea, like a BRT system or the mobility as a service systems, there have been local governments have been working on that. These are unevenly distributed, and transport access remains inequitable, particularly outside the Seoul metropolitan area. And the aging population adds to the urgency of this challenge. This is what we have observed, as older adults increasingly require safer, walkable environments and reliable, accessible transit options. Many elderly in Korea still prefer to age in places with higher density, making compact and connected development an urgency for the country to ensure that they have mobility, quality of life, and more inclusive growth. Next one. Next. Yeah, thank you. So, based on those conditions, what we have observed is that over the past 2 decades, the Korean national government has been pursuing a regional balanced development strategy to reduce this excessive overconcentration of population and public institutions in the Seoul metropolitan area. This has included the relocation of government agencies to newly created cities like the Sejong Administrative City and designating innovation cities to revitalize regional areas by relocating public institutions and incentivizing private sector to move to those areas. No, still the former one. Yes, thank you. While these efforts have been partially succeeded in redistributing population and economic functions, they still have faced some challenges, such as poor integration with existing urban areas, limited infrastructure in relocated zones, and insufficient transport connectivity, particularly for example, in Sejong. The recent Decentralization and Balanced Development Master Plan, adopted in 2023, if I'm not mistaken, and the emergence of megacity region initiatives try to improve this spatial planning. They have been trying to strengthen interregional cooperation and promote compact and connected urban development through better transport networks. However, one of the things that we observe is that they still require a more coherent governance and place-based plannings to fully succeed. One of the key initiatives that the government has introduced here is the 4+3 metropolitan economic clusters. For those of you who are not familiar with this concept, 4 refers to the 4 major regional economic zones outside the capital area, and 3 refers to the 3 major economic metropolitan clusters around the Seoul metropolitan area. And all these seven regions are designated as metropolitan economic clusters with specialized industrial focus based on regional strengths and future growth potential that they could have. And the idea is to try to distribute distribute growth across the country more evenly. Next one, please. One of the key aspects of these new policies in Korea to achieve balanced development is the decentralization and balanced development master plan, because that introduced 4 special zones to promote regional development and decentralization by empowering local ecosystems that attract talent and investments. These are the opportunity development zone, that offers tax breaks and regulatory incentives to attract large-scale corporate investment. Also, there's the education development zones. They try to strengthen local education systems and talent development through collaboration among local governments, schools, universities, and industries. Another important one for us for this project is the downtown cohesion zones, because they try to support high-density, mixed-use urban revitalization in city centers using existing infrastructure. And the other one, also very important, is the cultural-driven city, because they try to leverage cultural assets to boost local creativity and regional identity. One of the key lessons that we could observe from Korea's relocation initiatives is that jobs and housing alone are not enough to attract young people and companies to provincial cities. For example, leisure, culture, and commercial facilities are also essential for improving the quality of life. And that is what this strategy with the 4 areas is trying to achieve, to insert all those elements that are also that kind of a magnet to attract more young people and talent to these centers. The downtown cohesion zones, for example, this one's aim to address all these problems by promoting this high-density mixed-use development in city centers, integrating industrial, residential, and cultural functions tailored to the regional needs. Next one. However, thank you. However, we can see that this strategy, like any other strategy in OECD countries, has its strengths and some challenges or windows of opportunity, if you want. For example, the strengths. Well, this strategy marks a shift from a top-down to a bottom-up approach for regional development. Uses a place-based approach, includes education and industry as key areas to achieve balanced development, recognizes the value of culture in regional development or to promote regional growth, promotes the creation of megacity regions to integrate the city and suburban hinterland, and also the interdevelopment redevelopment plans to have a more coherent development efforts. However, we could identify that this strategy still has some issues that could be improved in the future. For example, the uneven local government capacity, because many small or less developed cities lack administrative, economic, and technical capacity to manage decentralization effectively. This imbalance could exacerbate regional disparities, as only well-resourced regions may benefit from the new powers and funding opportunities that they receive. And also because these small-sized cities have, in general, limited capacity and capability to conduct transit-oriented developments. We also observe a relatively weak coordination mechanisms. There is a risk of fragmented public investment without a strong vertical and horizontal coordination. The lack of integration, this could compromise infrastructure efficiency and lead to ineffective or duplicated efforts or projects in this respect. We also observe some flow megacity or new towns strategies. There are some things that could be improved over there, because building megacities and new towns is costly, slow, and some of the times fails to retain or attract population, particularly young talent. These projects often lack essential services like jobs and cultural infrastructure, risking becoming dormitory or commuter towns. We observe this when we talk to some of the local authorities over there, that this is something that they need to work on. We also observe some misaligned incentives and fiscal constraints. This is because local governments are fiscally dependent on the central government and may avoid acknowledging population decline to secure funding. This creates kind of like a perverse incentives to plan for unrealistic population growth, undermining sound development planning. And finally, one of the issues that they could find is the fragmented and over-specialized policy tools. This is because implementation of special zones like the downtown cohesion zones is fragmented and sometimes bureaucratic, focusing narrowly on industrial specialization, neglects the liability, the environmental resilience, and the broader urban sustainability goals. All these 4 areas should work together. The problem that we observe is that some cities could just be a cultural driven city, or could also be designated as education development zones, but not necessarily the 4 zones together. And this is something that perhaps could be improved in the future. Next one. One of the key issues in this report was to draw lessons from international experience on how to promote compact and connected development through the development of transit-oriented development projects. So we analyzed some international experience, and we observed that there are some very valuable lessons for Korea in this respect. For example, from the New South Wales in Australia, one of the key lessons is that it's necessary to plan transport-oriented development around mixed income housing and leisure spaces. The idea is to ensure that affordable housing is near transit hubs, preventing gentrification and supporting population retention, particularly of the young people and the elderly. In Ile-de-France, here in France, perhaps the main lesson could be that it's necessary to establish a strong multi-level governance structure with clear roles and long-term commitments across national, regional, and local governments. And perhaps the need to have a dedicated public body with authority over transport-oriented developments that helps ensure coherent and inclusive implementation of these TOD initiatives. In Japan, the city of Toyama, that is also had a very similar context like Korea now, with an aging and shrinking population. One of the key lessons that we could draw from this to build transport-oriented development to address demographic shifts and foster economic growth is the need to use existing infrastructure and focus on city-centered revitalization. Rather than expanding outwards, this experience suggests that cities should leverage current transport lines and urban cores to reduce costs, boost efficiency, and create more vibrant city centers. In Vancouver, in Canada, what we can learn from here that could be valuable for Korea is that it is necessary to adopt a people-oriented cross-sector planning. The idea is to prioritize accessibility and active mobility over car-centric planning to build more connected cities. In Copenhagen, the Finger Plan is a very famous plan. It's part of the history of Denmark. The key lesson here is that it's necessary to coordinate land use and transport planning using spatial frameworks like station proximity. And also Cork in Ireland, something that we will hear more later on in this seminar. One of the key lessons from Cork initiatives is that it's necessary to develop a long-term HG-aligned strategy vision that links compact growth with multimodal transport, urban regeneration, and regional coordination. Planning, in this case, should actively involve surrounding areas to reflect more like urban-rural interdependencies. Next one. With this next slide is, I just want to highlight some of the main recommendations that we make in the report. But for the sake of time, I didn't put all of them. We just want to highlight a couple of those. One of those recommendations that I would like to highlight here is perhaps the need to make transport-oriented development a central tool for urban renewal and social inclusion, particularly in the context of an aging population that Korea is facing. Leveraging TOD is not just for mobility, but also should be as a tool for regenerating city centers, ensuring affordable housing, walkability, and service accessibility, especially for those particular groups like young people and the elderly. The reason for this is that TOD, or this transport-oriented development, tend to foster more compact, accessible, and inclusive environments, aligning the physical, social, and economic needs of an aging population, reducing spatial and mobility barriers, and improving the quality of life. One important aspect that perhaps Korea should keep in mind here is the need to promote a more coordinated implementation of the 4 special zones and reform fiscal policies like property taxes or developing fees to disincentivize sprawl and reward more compact development. And finally, is a need to use a strategic foresight to future-proof urban policies. I mean, what I mean here is that it's necessary to include a long-term scenario planning and foresight in transport-oriented development design, especially to anticipate technological changes, climate pressures, and demographic shifts that the country will continue facing in the future. These, in a nutshell, are some of the main recommendations that included in the report. There are some more in the report that you could have a look at. And with this, I will conclude this presentation. Thank you. 감사합니다.
감사합니다. Thank you, Oscar and Bernhard, for the comprehensive presentations on the key findings from the reports. I think that helped the participants to understand what has been done from OECD, thanks to Mullet's support. So for the presentations, there seems there are 2 questions, and then 2 of them are for Bernhard. So first question would be, I'm gonna read. In the report, you look at access to pharmacies in the 37 regional hubs. But given that medical desert are a growing problem in rural areas, are there any intentions of focusing on rural areas to study this phenomenon in future research? And the second one is that what are the main causes for population growth in the northwest and southeast clusters in Korea? Is it due to migration from abroad or just regional resettlement? Are there any differences between the 2 clusters? Bernard, could you answer these questions? Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Rang. Thanks a lot for these 2 very, very interesting and relevant questions. So for the one on pharmacies, there's a few angles to that. One is we did this international comparative analysis where we check how many of these small settlements. So these are not the super rural area, but remember, a village starts from 500 people, so some of them are really small. And we checked how many of these have these pharmacies and other services. So I don't have the figure here for pharmacies alone. But here, Korea tends to do a bit better for these than the OECD average, than other OECD countries. Now, of course, we know that these deserts, they can be a problem in many countries. So that doesn't mean there are no problems with that. But so we addressed that a bit here. And then, of course,
Hello, Bernard.
I think we lost Bernard.
You lost me?
Yes. Ah,
I
okay.
can still hear
Are
you.
you back?
I got
Are
you
you back?
again. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Please move.
So yeah, of course, the regional hub strategy is not only relevant for these settlements, the regional hubs, but also for the surrounding areas that are often rural. That being said, it's still something that it's high up on our agenda to look at accessibility also in the rural areas. I guess we would be very happy to collaborate with Molid or with Korea on that, to look specifically for Korea and also in these more rural places, because the accessibility analysis we do here for the regional hubs and for the surroundings. So in these analysis, we include like a 5-kilometer buffer, but we can do this for the whole country essentially. So yeah, happy to
I think we lost him
We
again.
lost him. Maybe we should go to the next step, and if he
Yeah,
can
we are
dial
going to do that.
written
And then
form.
maybe these answers can be answered by Bernard in the later session, dedicated Q&A session later on. So thank you for the understanding. Then we will now move on to the panel discussion. I will hand over the moderation to Anna Moreno-Monroy, Head of Unit in the Economic Analysis, Data and Statistics Division of the CFE. Now the floor is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Rang, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning. So this panel, we will have three distinguished speakers. We will go through a series of questions. There will also be some time for speakers to answer questions from the audience. So please feel free to put those questions in the Q&A. So our panel today is composed of three speakers. The first is Luis Dijkstra, who is a team lead of territorial and city analysis at the European Commission's Research Center. We have Myung-Hwa Hwang, who is the managing director of the Geospatial Analysis and Monitoring Center of the Korea Research Institute for Human Settlements. And finally, we have Kevin O'Connor, who is a senior planner at the Forward Planning Unit of the Cork City Council in Ireland. So thank you very much for joining us today. And I will start with a couple of questions for Luis, if I may. So good morning, Luis. And the first question is related to a paper you presented recently, where you talked about the drivers of population growth. And we know the classical ones, natural change and net migration. But in this paper, you brought attention to an additional aspect that affects population growth, and that is the reclassification of settlement. So how important do you think this aspect is for Korea from what you heard today, and what would be your advice for analysis going forward, given your findings?
Thank you, Anna. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. This is a topic close to my heart, and I fully agree with Nadim. There's lots we can learn from Korea, also for European countries, which are increasingly aging and shrinking as well. So no, I think this is a very important topic. We looked globally at the issue of how cities grow, and reclassification is when an area next to a city becomes part of the city, and typically there's already some population there. But because most analysis happens without any spatial boundaries, that gets ignored. And the result of that is that we overestimate the impact of migration and we underestimate the impact of natural change. So because the people in those areas also have babies and tend to grow. So it's really important to think about that spatially. Now, of course, Korea is in a different phase of demographic change with low birth rates, negative natural change, as in many regions in Europe. But nevertheless, I think it's important to remember this spatial expansion. In planning community, there's a big debate between the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard, and the YIMBYs, yes in my backyard. And also the compact cities approach is a bit of a risk there. Why do I say that? Compact cities often cover policies that actually are not about growth. They're not about development, but they're just about defending the people who are already there, defending the interest of the status quo and of the current homeowners. And I think that's a very unbalanced point of view. And so for me, what I would really argue people to consider is that compact development still means development, right? And so that means growing up and out. It's not because you build on something which wasn't a building site before that it's not compact development. And so for me, the key lesson there is to think about city boundaries as flexible. Don't go for a growth boundary that's a super inflexible policy and has a lot of negative effects. And typically that's the key policy people think of when they think of a compact city. We need a growth boundary, need a city boundary. You don't. You just need to make it easier for people to build up or build close to the city center. And I think that is really a key policy. And one last thing I'm going to say there is also, it's not because your population is shrinking that you shouldn't build anymore. the type of housing people want will change, the household size will change, fashions will change, needs will change. Even with a shrinking population, you will probably need more dwellings and different dwellings as the household size often compensates for reductions in total population. But so yeah, stop talking here, but think about city boundaries as flexible and allow managed growth out and up.
Thank you, Luis. As usual, very provocative. So I'm sure will spark some debate later from our audience, from Walid and colleagues in Korea, and also from other panelists. So we can come back to some of these points during the discussion at the end. But for now, your second question. So you've seen the kind of things that we can do when we have very good data, for instance, on the location of services, when we have population grids, and how all of this is very important especially for countries that are going through aging and shrinking. So in your experience working with data, is there anything else that can be added? What are important sources of data that we can consider when we analyze these kind of problems?
I have to confess that I'm slightly jealous of the data available in Korea. They're an inspiration to us all. So really, a lot. My hats off to all of you. On the one data point or the one kind of aspect which I think we're increasingly able to capture and I think is important is migration by age. If you get good data on births and deaths by age, I mean, births usually at age 0, but deaths vary. You can find out where people are moving from and where people are moving to. In Europe, it's very clear. There's a very clear life cycle to movements. You know, young people move to the big city to go to university, to find a new job, maybe find a partner. Once they're a bit older and a bit more settled, they move to suburbs or smaller communities. Once they get closer to retirement, they leave the big, loud, expensive city and then they move to the countryside. And I mentioned that because in Europe, we have a tendency to panic when young people move to the city where this is a very long-standing, old, logical pattern that'll be very difficult to change, and forget that people middle-aged or older actually move back. And so we see many places that, yes, you see an outflow of young people, but that's no reason to panic because they will come back, or somebody will come back, probably not at the same age, but maybe when they have kids or teenagers or when they want to retire. So for me, getting a good handle on the direction and flows of migration is really critical to understand. And that will also help if you understand the age structure. Typically places with a very high elderly population think, oh, we're going to shrink. Well, it depends. If you're a retirement community, every senior might be replaced by another, right? So I think it's important to understand the age structure, age flows, because it changes what you can expect for the future.
Great, thank you very much, Luis. And for now, we move on to our second panelist. So Myung-Hwa Hwang, thank you very much for joining us. And my question is about compact and connected strategies that we heard about in the previous presentation. So in your experience, how these strategies can help us deal with demographic change? And then what are Korean initiatives that are using such policies?
First of all, thank you for having me in this discussion and congratulations on the launch of this OECD report. And I'm truly honored again to be here. And thank you for the question. And I don't think the compact and connected strategies can alone reverse the overall trend of population decline in Korea, but it can help us manage this change more effectively. And so by focusing on population and services in well-equipped centers like urban centers, towns, and villages, we can use land and infrastructure more efficiently. These strategies also help extend access to key services from these centers to surrounding areas. So this means that we can support a good quality of life even in the shrinking regions, and eventually reduce the strong concentration of people and resources in the Seoul metropolitan area. But I think it will take some time. And So the OECD report you published, I think, have already reviewed many Korean policies for balanced development. So some recent examples include the regional revitalization town project. So we try to build small residential and some complexes in rural towns, so to attract younger people and also host the comeback, returning the older people. And also we are doing the megacity regional development strategies, and both are, I think, based on the idea of compact and connected spatial development. And in Korea, in urban planning, I think we have recently started to guide shrinking cities to transform their urban spatial structure to more compact and connected form through national planning guidelines. So we do not we recommend to reduce the planned population for the future population to a reasonable number of population, so that we can manage overdevelopment outskirts of the city boundaries. And in rural policies, we also see similar efforts to creating some smaller service hubs in towns and villages to deliver essential public services more effectively. And also in Korea, we have designated depopulated areas. They are including 89 시군gus in Korea. And for those areas, the government encourages cooperation between local government to build better connected living zones among different administrative units. So I think all these current policies have already included some part of the concept and connected thinking. But I think we still need some more time and effort to turn this concept into concrete policy measures, because it's, as Dr. Luis mentioned, that is maintaining the density of development in the city, but not promoting underdevelopment or overdevelopment of the city. So it is for maintenance, I think. So we need more specific tools for implementing that idea, and especially those for enabling TOD in the populated regional hub, because TOD is still very costly. We all agree they are needed, but it is very costly to implement especially in the depopulated areas.
Thank you, Ming-Hwan, for that excellent overview and such clear insights. And I want to come back to the regional hubs, regional centers, and living zones. And you saw that we used an approach to identify them, and we know they're very key to these strategies. So can you tell us, Korea, how have you been identifying these regional centers or regional hubs, and how the ones you have identified compared to the ones that we found in the report, and what can we learn from that?
Yeah. So in terms of regional hubs, I think our government does not have the official hubs or living zones designated in terms of policy measures. But there are some efforts to identify some core cities in terms of the comprehensive national planning. I think it is under ongoing job now. But we have some project that is called National Land Monitoring Project. It is also run by MOLID and our center. And in this project, we are trying to identify various types of local centers across the country. And these centers are not yet the same as OECD's urban centers, towns, or villages, and they are using a little bit different indicators, such as residential population and worker population, home to work, estimated flows from the private big data, and also distance to public facilities. So in this project, we are trying to provide the data about this center to local planners so that they can define their own local hubs according to their regional context. So also in this project, we are experimenting with defining living zones at the national level, and we are using mobile phone data at 500 square meter grid level to track people's movements. And this work is still in the pilot stage, but we are reviewing the data stability and methods. So in terms of the method used in the OECD report, I think it is very reasonable, and I want to present my gratitude for using data from the Korea's National Territorial Survey, which also I have been involved in. And especially, I appreciate how you analyze the location and types of service and use that to identify regional hub. I think it is that can be a good method to be applied widely as an international standard. In Japan and in our research, we also try to distinguish between regional level and national neighborhood level services. For example, we try to distinguish a city hall from town office so that we can use the information of a service hierarchy better. So, and also we are attempting to reflect real service user trips from various types of data. But collecting this kind of data and also interpreting the meaning of those tweets have not been easy yet. So I think we try to more work to develop our method into a robust version. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very, very interesting. And I'm sure you made Louis very jealous when you mentioned the mobile data at such a granular level. And here we come back to the importance of understanding flows and also having some inputs from the regions and to define the hub. So I can see how what you're doing and what we did is a good complement. And we hope that this will contribute to moving forward the identification to support the planning efforts of Korea. So thank you very much. For now, I will move to Kevin from Ireland. So Kevin, in the Cork City Council, so you work there, and from your experience, how is the council ensuring that land use planning around future light rail and bus corridors actively supports higher densities and mixed use development, and in particular in regeneration areas, so city docks and Tivoli docks? If you can tell us a bit about that case and how you see a parallel with what we are discussing here today in Korea. And welcome, Kevin.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Cork City on the south coast of Ireland. And I'm honored to be here today. And thank you for having me to share some insights about what we do in Cork City. So in Cork, and it is referenced in the report, we have a metropolitan transport strategy called the Cork Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy. And we shorten that to CMAT. It's a lot easier to say. And that sets a framework for the planning and delivery of transport infrastructure and services across the city and its wider metropolitan area. And that includes light rail and bus corridors. So when we prepared our city development plan a few years ago, and the city development plan is the city's key strategic planning document, we ensure that all our land use policies aligned with this transport framework. So for example, we prepared a detailed urban density and building height strategy for the city, which designated higher densities along public transport routes, either existing or planned, which were identified in our CMAT strategy. But of course, we had to balance these higher densities with other considerations, such as built form, sensitivities around architectural conservation, visual impact, and so on. But that was just one land use strategy. We prepared others for green and blue infrastructure provision, active recreation, and strategic employment areas. So we ensure that all our land use policies are aligned with our strategic transport framework at the heart. And these strategies were all informed by an understanding of our city at a granular level. So we carry out city capacity studies to identify the potential of underutilized zoned lands, across the city for future development. We carry out neighborhood level socioeconomic studies to really understand how the city works at a local level. And this approach really allows us to embed higher densities and mixed use development into our strategic generation areas, like our city docks and our Tivoli docks areas that you mentioned. Those are our two major regeneration dockland areas in Cork. Combined, they're the largest regeneration area in Ireland, and I'm told in Europe, but I stand corrected. We also apply local demand management measures along our transport corridors, such as lower car parking provision, and we encourage mobility management plans for large development, but that's more at a site level. For the city docklands in Tivoli, which are our two flagship regeneration areas, we went a step further and we prepared detailed development frameworks for these areas, all supported by area-based transport strategies. Now, Tivoli docks, it's still an active port, and that's a longer-term prospect. But the development of our city docks area, which is much closer to our city centre, is backed by a multi-billion euro investment package from the Irish government to provide enabling infrastructure, including a new light rail system to support up to 25,000 people and 25,000 jobs. But this is all underpinned by our framework, which aligns land use with mobility and transport. Can you still see me? My camera's frozen. Have I?
No, we don't see you, but we hear you. So yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. We hear you well. So if you can restart it, but otherwise we continue like this and try to fix a bit later.
I'll see what I can do on my side. Apologies.
No worries. Okay, so oh yeah, now I
There
see
we
you.
go.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. Very interesting. I haven't been there myself, but I can picture what's happening in there. We also know that the Cork Metropolitan Area Transport is being coordinated with land zoning decisions. This is part of transport-oriented development, of course. And there, can you tell us more how this alignment works, in particular for population and job growth with transit investment? So how you're combining the three elements through the coordination of these two parts?
Yes, of course. So the Cork metropolitan area is administered by two different local authorities, Cork City Council, where I work, being one of them. But we do have a long history of integrated land use and transport planning dating back to 1978. And back then we had a land use and transportation plan that identified where key elements of strategic transport infrastructure that we see on the ground today should be realized, and where strategic employment areas would be located around the metropolitan area. And that, in most senses, has been realized. Later in 2001, the two local authorities collaborated further under a Cork area strategic plan, which focused development along the city's heavy rail corridor or commuter rail corridor, and recommended the delivery of things like green routes, which combined bus priority measures, the dedicated cycle facilities. And fast forward to 2020, when CMATS, or our metropolitan areas, Cork Metropolitan Area Transport Strategy, was produced, that really built upon those previous strategies, but it also took account of new requirements and national imperatives, including a 50% growth ambition for Cork City by 2040, national climate action targets, and Cork is one of 100 cities around the EU that strive for, we call it a climate mission city, strive for climate neutrality. So that's a big driver for us, and also national imperatives on the requirement for compact growth. So our transport strategy outlines a long-term vision for sustainable mobility, but also urban development, with a focus on reducing reliance on the private motor vehicle through closer alignment of land use and transportation planning. But one of the key ways in which this strategy actually does align land use with transport planning is in implementation and governance, because it is a collaborative effort, as I said, between the two local authorities, but also between two state bodies tasked with both providing and maintaining transport infrastructure. So that really ensures that transport planning is embedded in our local development policies and land use zoning decisions, but it also puts Cork on the national agenda, which is very important. On the policy side and the planning side, if you like, our city development plan that I referenced under the last question incorporates all of our transport strategy principles by zoning lands for higher densities and mixed use near transport corridors. And the focus really is on urban consolidation rather than sprawl. And a good example of this, once again, is in our city Docklands area, which we're busy planning at the moment, and we have been doing so for a number of years, when all the principles of compact growth and mixed-use development and sustainable transport have been planned under a single framework. And this allows us to phase transport and other infrastructure provision. When I say other infrastructure, I'm talking about schools and sports facilities and so on, to ensure that the future residents of this new community, this new city center community we will create, and the workers are provided with the right level of accessibility at the right time. So it's all about phasing. I guess when our transport strategy was produced, its authors were mindful of the vision for our city docks areas when it determined the wider transport needs for the wider city and ultimately recommended the delivery of a high capacity light rail system for the area to cater for the expected volume of sustainable trips generated by the future population of this area. And just to end off, aligning land use and transport planning requires an iterative approach, but in Cork we have that fundamental baseline now of our transport strategy upon which we can really focus on delivering transport-orientated development across the city.
Thank you, Kevin. That's very interesting, and I'm sure there will be some questions. So now, actually, we have about 15 minutes, so I do want to go for some questions from the public. I think, Mian Huang, there are 2 questions for you that you would like to answer. Then we move on to some other questions. Maybe also panelists can ask questions to each other. I'm sure you found the conversation very insightful too. So first we start with the 2 questions from the chat to Myung Hwa.
I will address the second one first because it can be very short. So we use public institutes because we wanted to identify smaller centers in rural areas. So for that, we use the city hall or town meeting centers because they are using as a gathering place for rural communities. And also for the mobile phone data, we have different providers, and we are using currently data from KT, Korea Telecom, but we have other options, and we are testing them, and we try to compare them in terms of their performance and stability. And I will move on to the first one. The territorial monitoring project started 3 years ago, and it tried to look at the territorial changes across the Korean country. And so we have about 40 indicators, and half of them are measured at the 1 square kilometer grid. And one of the important part is measures about the spatial structure. So for that, we try to identify centers across the country, and the living zone is one of the elements of the spatial structure. So we try to use that as our good data. And the challenges is that there are so many. So even though we develop some indicators and data, the MOLIT wants to have strong evidence that they can be applicable to real world problems. So we are trying to collaborate with the local government to test out that our data are reliable and reasonable and acceptable. So also we are having problems getting different data, like the mobile phone data. Currently, we have a collaboration with different research institutes, but we need to make strong, sustainable foundation for collecting data. And this can be answered for the questions.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if there are follow-up questions, you can put them in the chat. But for now, there's also a question for Kevin. I think, Kevin, people are curious to dig a bit deeper in the actual mechanisms or governance arrangements that allow this planning and transport development coordination, and specifically between the city center and neighboring areas. So if you can tell us a bit more in detail, what kind of arrangements have been put in place and how these arrangements came about?
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good question. And the reason it's a good question is because in Ireland, the local authorities where I work are responsible for spatial planning, but we have no role in providing transport infrastructure. Essentially, these are provided from a central basis. So to answer the question in one word, I guess, is collaboration. So we have to ensure that on the planning side, we are aligned with our regional planning authorities' ambitions for the wider area, but also it's important for us to put Cork on the national spatial planning agenda. We're the second city behind a very large capital city in Dublin, so the question for us is all about regional balanced development. So it's important for us to not be forgotten about when it comes to the national scene. And in fairness, we never forgotten about, but it's important to maintain our position at the top table. But it's also about collaborating with transport providers to ensure that our land use planning, our strategic vision, if you like, for the city matches the investment programs of the infrastructure providers. And it's not just transport, it's about the utility providers who provide things like water, electricity, and sewage services, and so on. We need to make sure that everyone's vision is aligned, that we're all pulling in the same direction, as the phrase down here in Cork. It's all the way we do our regional planning in Cork City is all about a settlement hierarchy of interconnected areas. So we have the city center and the city suburbs, and then it funnels out. I'm sure it's a similar approach around the world, but it's very important for us to maintain our connectivity to our smaller settlements, our towns and villages. And that's a challenge. I think one of our previous speakers mentioned that TOD is quite expensive when you try to roll it out into the rural areas, and it's all about maintaining that balance of effective use of state funds to provide the most benefit for our communities.
Great, thank you very much, Kevin. And now, final round. If the panelists have questions for each other, Luis, knowing you probably have a question for. Now that you didn't get a question, you get to ask a question if you wish, or I have a question for you anyway, so as you prefer.
I do have a question. I answered a few in the chat already, but my question to the two other panelists is I think it's very important what government does, but it's also important as a signaling function to investors, to households, what they plan to do, right? And so I thought the 4+3 strategy for Korea was excellent for economic development, but then for these regional hubs, you would also kind of need a signal of like, okay, this is an area that we want to strengthen, encourage people to invest in, to move to stay in. And so my question, both for Korea and Cork, is how are you communicating this to the broader public, and in particular, people trying to decide where to start up a business or where to move to or buy a house?
We're both being very polite. Should I go first? It's a good
Yes,
question.
Kevin, please. Go
It's
ahead.
a good question. Here in Cork, we have lots of investment by FDI. That's very important to us. We have European headquarters of major software companies and so on. So it's important to us to be able to provide everything that young workers need. And this has come up from other speakers. I was quite struck by the similarities in some of the things that were said and how they relate to Cork in terms of being able to provide housing, for example, and amenities that would attract talent. And in Ireland, it's no secret that we have a national housing crisis, housing shortage, and it's very complex. I could speak all day about it, but I won't, is the good news. And look, we work with agencies that attract investment into Ireland, and we work with agencies that deals with domestic businesses to try and support economic growth in Cork. And we work closely with housing development agencies, be they voluntary or state-sponsored. And we work with Fáilte Island, which is our national tourism board. And so we have a multi-pronged approach to get the message out that Cork is open for business. It's almost like a marketing campaign, and I'm not an expert in marketing, but it all ties in with how we plan our city. And that's why our strategic planning vision is so important. And yes, I know I always talk about planning, but that's what I am, so forgive me for that. But it all comes back to being able to be ready to deliver when these opportunities arise.
That's great. I'm also a planner. Nobody's perfect.
Myung-hwa, are you also a planner, or do you have something to complement here?
I think Korea, the Korean government have made a great effort to make signal that the unbalanced development is the problem for our population decline. I think now Korean people, they agree with that the balanced development is important for maintaining the local areas. And still, I think even though there are signals, I think people are still having problems, moving into the non-metropolitan areas. So that I think why our policies is focused on making spatial zones in there people can make companies without many taxes, and they can get some incentives. So that is kind of top-down approach so far. I think in times, we look at the Japanese case a lot. In Japan, I think now they have some grassroots movements so that they can have some volunteers or local non-profit organizations to manage their own communities. So that I think our top-down approach can be combined with that kind of bottom-up approaches in time. But I think so far we make signals from top and try to attract many companies into the non-solar area. But still, it has been very difficult. But people are acknowledging that is a really big problem in, I think, our country.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was great. Very fruitful discussion. Just going to say a couple of words to close, and thank you very much to our panelists for this very rich discussion. I think the topic today, demographic change and how we get city planning right, urban planning. I think at some point it was mentioned that we don't want to underdevelop and we don't want to overdevelop. So how do we get this planning right, especially in a context where demographics are changing, populations are declining and aging. So we want to guide this planning. We don't want to put too much structure on it. And we need to plan for the future. So for this, we need to collect as much data as possible for who is living in cities, what are the ages, where do they move to and fro, to understand what we're working with. How is the access of those people to transport and services, and plan around that? So how data can contribute to this goal. But then that's only one part of the input. The other very important part is how we implement these policies. And here we talked about governance, the importance of collaboration, and also the last remarks, how we go from top to bottom to also bottom up kind of approaches, combining those to get our planning right. It's very important, especially for minimizing regional imbalances and creating well-being across the whole country. So that I think as some final words, I thank our speakers very much for their participation. To our colleagues in Korea, it was a pleasure to work on this report. We hope to continue this collaboration with you, and some of us see you very soon there in Korea too. And then with this, I conclude and thank the audience also for their active participation, and we hope to see you in some next opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.